Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void were prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Murmurarachne, ant-mimicking spiders, are part of a group known as jumping spiders. These spiders specialise in feeding on specific species of ants, with some spiders even going as far as to mimic ants of specific age groups, with different colours for different ant maturities. Waving a pair of legs in the air like antennae, they go unnoticed as they ambush lone ants and drag them away to be eaten. Adding insult to injury, in males the mouth parts are enlarged and elongated to resemble the head of an ant. Like something out of a horror movie, the false head splits open to reveal a pair of needle-like fangs, used to pierce prey and deter rival spiders. Sounds pretty aggressive and almost fictional, doesn't it? Today we are going to be talking about a religious group known as Messianic Judaism. Many Orthodox and traditional Jewish people believe that Messianic Jews conceal their true identity and pose as traditional Jews in order to gain a following for their own religious movement. But what is Messianic Judaism? What are the beliefs and practices? How and when was this group born? And most importantly to this show, is it cult or no cult? You decide. I am your speaker Casey, and this is the Cult Vault. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a short warning about this episode. It is going to be research heavy with a lot of background information, but I promise that it is relevant. First of all, I think it's important to establish some key facts and practices before we jump right in. I know some listeners may not identify with a religion, and if you do, perhaps you aren't familiar with the practices of other religious groups. I know I sure wasn't before researching for this episode. But after I was contacted by somebody who has left the Jewish Messianism behind, I realised I would need to know a lot more about Judaism before I could tell their story. So here goes. The BBC website tells us that traditional Judaism can be broken down like this. Judaism began nearly 4,000 years ago in a place called the Middle East. This is a large area on the border of Asia, Africa and Europe. Jews believe that there is only one God. They believe that they have a special agreement with God called a covenant. Jews promise to obey God's laws, to say thank you to him for looking after them. Jews believe a man named Abraham was the first person to make a covenant with God. Abraham was Hebrew. Jews believe God named Abraham's grandson Israel. After this, the Hebrews became known as Israelites. Abraham is considered the father of the Jewish people, and the Israelites are his descendants. Later, a man named Moses saved the Jewish people from persecution in Egypt when he led them to safety across the Red Sea. After this, the Jews lived in the desert, where God gave Moses a set of rules which they should live by, including this as the Ten Commandments. Moses is the most important Jewish prophet. The Jewish holy book is known as the Tanakh, or Hebrew Bible. The word Tanakh comes from the first letters of the 3 different parts of the book. The Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. The Christian Bible also begins with these books, in the part which Christians call the Old Testament. The Nevi'im, which are the books of the Jewish prophets such as Joshua and Isaiah, and Ketuvim, which is a collection of other important writings. The Torah has 613 commandments which are called mitzvah. They are the rules that Jews tried to follow. The most important ones are the 10 Commandments given to Moses. The Torah is so special that people are not allowed to touch it. It is kept in a safe place called an ark in the Jewish temple, and when people read from the Torah, they use a special pointer stick called a yad to follow the words. Jews worship God in a synagogue. Jewish people attend services at the synagogue on Saturdays during Shabbat. Shabbat, or the Sabbath, is the most important time of the week for Jews. It begins on Friday evenings and ends at sunset on Saturdays. During Shabbat, Jews remember that God created the world and on the 7th day he rested. Jews believe God's day of rest was a Saturday. The services in the synagogue are led by a religious leader called a rabbi, which means teacher in Hebrew. With this brief introduction to Judaism, here is a brief introduction to Christianity, which can also be found on the BBC website. Christianity is focused on the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, who Christians believe to be the Son of God. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the Middle East over 2,000 years ago. Christians believe there is only one God, but that he is revealed in 3 different forms: God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Christians model themselves on the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. Jesus taught people to love God and love their neighbour. Christians believe that God sent Jesus to live as a human being in order to save humanity from the consequences of its sins, the bad things humanity had chosen to do, which had separated them from God. Christians believe that through the death and resurrection of Jesus, this broken relationship with God is restored. The Christian holy book is the Bible. It is divided into Old and New Testaments. The New Testament explains how God sent his only Son, Jesus Christ, to restore the broken relationship between people and God, which had been caused by human wrongdoing. Jesus was executed on a cross, or crucifixion, as a criminal by the Romans, and according to Christian teaching, after 3 days he rose from the dead. This is also known as the resurrection. Many Christians worship in churches. Some groups meet in homes and other buildings. Church means the gathering of Christians, as well as the building in which Christians worship. Their leaders are called priests or ministers. Many churches hold a service called communion or Mass. During Mass, bread and wine are shared together, just as Jesus did with his followers before his death. The YouTube channel and podcast called Telltale covers a lot about cults and sects, and one video has a brief overview of Messianic Judaism. All of the references and sources used and cited in this podcast will be in the show notes, as always. But I want to give a special shout out to Telltale. His podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including Spotify and iTunes, and you can find his extremely informative show under Telltale Atheist. In this particular episode, he talks of how we have all heard of the 10 Commandments, but Jewish groups have 613 commandments they follow after these 10 commandments. The 10 commandments can be found in Exodus 20, and the 613 are in Exodus 21. Some examples are: if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not allowed to go free like male servants. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. Anyone who attacks their father or mother will be put to death. Anyone who kidnaps somebody is to be put to death, whether the person has been killed or is still in the kidnapper's possession. The commandments tell us a lot about what these times were like. The penalty for most things is death. Christianity versus Messianic Judaism. Jews still think old laws apply, and they still think Jesus is the prophet. They are Christian in the most traditional sense, but Jewish in the most traditional sense. They celebrate Passover, follow Jewish laws. They just don't think Jesus did away with the laws when he died. Jesus in Judaism is referred to as Yeshua. Jesus Christ means the same as Yeshua HaMashiach. It literally translates from Hebrew into English as Joshua the Anointed One. Lesuos Christos in Greek means Joshua the Anointed One. Lesuos is the Greek transliteration of the Hebrew word Yeshua, from which we derived Jesus in English. So now we know about traditional Judaism and traditional Christianity. I can tell you that Messianic Judaism seems to be a mashup of both of these religions. So let's find out a bit more about where this religious movement came from. This information is taken from the website Jewish Voice. It says, Messianic Judaism's genesis is intertwined with the Jesus movement of the 1960s. During that revival, many young people with strong ethnically Jewish backgrounds came to faith in Yeshua. Societal changes of that time offered these young Jewish people the freedom to maintain their Jewish heritage and practices while embracing faith in Jesus as their promised Messiah. The attitude shifted from "we're Christians who happen to be Hebrew" to "we are Jews who believe in Jesus," representing a new mindset that shaped the modern movement of Messianic Judaism. Since 1960, many new Messianic Jewish congregations, organizations and ministries were formed. During this time, hundreds of Messianic congregations were established around the world, including in Israel. Today, more than 350,000 Messianic Jews worship in their own congregations worldwide, with approximately 20,000 of those residing in Israel. Messianic Judaism remains a relatively new movement, being only around 60 years old. The Conversion.com would go on to explain Jewish Messianism this way. Messianic Jews consider themselves Jewish Christians. Specifically, they believe, as do all Christians, that Jesus is the Son of God, as well as the Messiah, and that he died in atonement for the sins of mankind. There are approximately 175,000 to 250,000 Messianic Jews in the US and 350,000 worldwide. About 10,000 to 20,000 living in Israel. According to Dan Juster, a theologian who founded a major Messianic congregation, there are currently about 300 congregations in the US alone. Most of these groups consider the conversion of ethnic Jews, people with at least one Jewish parent, to Messianic Judaism as a central part of their mission. Belief in a Messiah who will redeem the Jewish people and thereby usher in a new, more humane era is very much a Jewish concept. However, there are deep theological differences between Jews and Christians regarding exactly who the Messiah is, what a Messiah should do, and even how central a Messiah should be to their traditions. According to both the Hebrew Bible and Jewish oral tradition, a Messiah is a king, a warrior, a political figure, or a revolutionary whose mission is divine and specific to the Jews. But the leader is neither divine nor a saviour concerned with the afterlife of humanity. Neither is a Messiah worshipped as a deity. The idea of Hebrew Christians developed, and Count Zinzendorf in Germany and Joseph Rabinowitz in Russia both attempted to initiate Jewish expressions of worshipping Jesus around this time, but neither were particularly successful. The first functioning place of worship for Jewish believers was Christ Church in Jerusalem, which was completed in 1849, with a Jewish believer called Solomon Alexander as the first Protestant bishop in Israel. The number of Jewish believers in Israel was small, and even those few were evacuated out of Israel by boat after the Second World War, with Christians fearing what might happen to them once the State of Israel had been created. This left less than 25 Jewish believers in the land when Israel was born a country in 1948. The state tolerated the believers, but generally, those bringing in the gospel were treated with hostility and abhorrence. Since the Holocaust, along with most historical persecution of the Jews, was perceived to be a particularly Christian phenomenon, early Israel was still in survival mode, and talk of Jesus was seen as a threat. Despite their rivaled status, the number of Messianic believers in Israel continued to grow, roughly tripling each decade. Two big waves of revival came, the first in the 1970s and the second in the 1990s. The first was a result of the Jesus movement in America, considered by many to have been spiritually precipitated by the events of Jerusalem in 1967. Thanks to the first wave connected with the Jesus movement, Messianic Judaism began to flourish, particularly in the US, and Jewish believers began to call themselves Messianic Jews rather than Hebrew Christians. They took their identity and responsibility as Jews seriously and lived and worshipped in a more Jewish way. Several of these American Jews emigrated to Israel, and some are pastors of the congregations here to this day. Later, the Russian Jews arrived, bolstering the numbers of believers in Israel. Today, there are hundreds of Messianic congregations in Israel and many more worldwide, and the numbers only continue to increase. What makes the targeting of Jews for conversion to Christianity particularly painful and damaging is that for over 1,000 years, Jews were persecuted, first at the hands of a Christian Roman Empire and then the Church, because Christians did not believe that Jewish scriptures contained truths claimed by another religion. So, we know that Messianic Judaism is sort of a mashup of Christianity and Judaism. We know roughly where it came from, and now we have a testimony of somebody who has been a part of Messianic Judaism. For protection, this person has asked to remain anonymous, so I will refer to this person as Eustace. She took the time to tell me her story, and some of this content comes with a trigger warning. Some of it may be upsetting, so discretion is advised. Eustace said, "The name for this group is Messianic Judaism. I didn't socialise with many other Messianic Jewish congregations or synagogues, so my group may have differed in ways that I don't know about. It's generally an older denomination and is dying out. My group was largely Hispanic, with many black members, either African American like my family, or from the islands below and near Florida like Haiti and Jamaica. There were quite a few white families as well. It was very diverse. It wasn't my decision to join. My mother joined in a complicated string of decisions related to her trying to teach us both physical and spiritual geography when I was about 10 years old. We hadn't gone to church or a co-op in 2 years. A co-op is a group of homeschoolers meeting together to organise once-weekly classes and PE. We only ever left the house to go to the grocery store or to the bank. My mother decided she would get us back into socialising this way too."
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
My daily routine was already chaotic and inconsistent, and it is difficult for me to establish a pattern before and how it changed after. Monday to Thursday, things largely felt the same. Initially, we went to Friday services and I really enjoyed hanging out with other children my age. I made friends quickly and wanted to stay all of the time. I wanted to go to every service and do every holiday. When we became more involved, my dad decided to participate. We started going to Saturday services. I became very involved over the next 8 to 9 years, being something of a folk dancer for about 6 of those years. This consisted of Israeli nationalist costumes, such as dresses with the Star of David on them, and mock IDF uniforms. We didn't have adequate footwear, so I suffered from plantar fasciitis for a while. I was meant to call Jesus Yeshua and was actively discouraged from calling him Jesus, which the congregation considered a pagan term. My family strictly kept kosher, avoiding foods like candies with gelatin in them. My father wore a prayer shawl, but my mother did not cover her hair. This was typical. Fathers were expected to wear shawls, but it was up to individual families whether the mother would cover up her hair, Orthodox Jew style, or not. Fathers also had the option to wear what is called a kippah, but I have often heard others outside the congregation referred to more commonly as a yarmul. The routine for the weekend was theoretically that all work stops at sunset on Friday. We were meant to rest and read the Old Testament for a portion of the day. There was a New Testament portion, but it was largely ignored. We danced to completely different worship songs by Messianic artists, so much so that I know very little of contemporary Christian music songs when I went to college. Next, there was the partial reading of the Old Testament prophets or Psalms, and sometimes New Testament portions in Hebrew, Spanish and English. Then there was the sermon and children's class. Children under 12 listened to Old Testament stories with felt guides or veggie tales, and children over 12 attended a Bible study style class where we reviewed the story with a more mature outlook. As I had spent a few years before reading the New Testament as a secular Christian, I knew a little bit more than my friends, who knew little to nothing about the New Testament, just that it was the fulfillment of the Old Testament, so we didn't have to do animal sacrifices anymore. After the class, we returned to service for communion and prayer, and then broke to eat. Friday services went from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. including meals, while Saturday services usually ran from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. including meals. Leaving was a slow burn for me. I first remember realising that I hated it when I was about 17. I couldn't wait to go to college, but I couldn't verbalise or even admit to myself that I didn't want to be a Messianic anymore. At 18, I left for college. The congregation prayed for me to keep the faith and be a witness to others. And then everyone I knew there largely never spoke to me again, even when I visited for major holidays called feasts. In March of 2015, I realised on a missions trip that I was done. I didn't have to be stuck in a place I didn't want to be anymore. I felt it was clear that God wanted me to approach him on my terms, not controlled by other people. Even then, I was afraid of admitting that it was a cult. It took another 4 years or so of living in different places around the country and seeing lots of other churches before I realised that what I had endured was simply insane. I had immediately told my family I wasn't Messianic, and they largely refused to acknowledge it, or tried to talk me into saying that I kinda sort of am, even though I'm not really. I don't think they know I don't keep kosher. They know I do yoga, which they hate. I contact them only when I absolutely have to. Because of that and other things, I'm not sure what they know about me besides the fact that I live in another state. In terms of cult mind control, there are lots of things that I can recall. With the leader promoting dependence and obedience, the ultimate goal was for us to live on farmed land together. Restrict or control sexuality. Besides only allowing heterosexual people into the church, divorced women were side-eyed and young girls endured constant talks about purity and never doing anything with a boy. We were spied on when hanging out with boys. Whether we were actually dating or not, everything was reported to our parents. Control of clothing and hairstyle. Technically, women could wear pants, but you really had to wear a skirt in order to dance. And that's all anybody ever did during worship. Wearing pants was like an active symbol that you weren't going to participate at all that day. And sometimes people would bring you a skirt, so that you could change out of your pants and go and dance. Regulate what you eat and drink and how much. Eating kosher, fasting was encouraged, and in my household it was mandatory for the Feast of Atonement. I was borderline underweight, and fasting was extremely miserable for me, sparking feelings that I was fat, the urge to binge on a ton of food, and irregular eating patterns for the next several days. To this day, it's not something I can do healthily. Deprive you of 7 to 9 hours sleep. This didn't happen in the church, but my mother did this on her own. She was her own cult leader in a way, with some spiritual deliverance and counselling that she would do to break people out of spiritual bonds. I never did this, although she wanted me and my sister to. Exploit you financially. I was young, I didn't have finances for them to exploit, but my parents did this on their own once I had become an adult. Restrict leisure time and activity. Any leisure time, especially by teenagers, was seen as time we were really supposed to be working. Any conversation you were in the middle of could be interrupted by an adult who wants you to clean the kitchen or sweep or wash all the dishes or take out the trash. Our choices in activities was constantly monitored, and we would be interrupted if our activity was too much for the adults. This could be anything from hula hooping to running to playing a secular game. Require you to seek permissions for decisions. I think other teenagers had to deal with this and not myself. I was extremely headstrong. My mother saw me as an extension of herself, which was largely miserable for me, but it came with the perk that if anybody really went too far and demanded I be one thing or another, all I had to do was snitch to my mother. She had a terrifying effect on other adults, and they would leave me alone after that. Deliberately withhold or distort information. I don't know if they know or would admit they did this because of their biases, but they absolutely did. To this day, I'm still finding passages in the Bible that were skewed when I first heard them. Discourage access to non-cult sources of information. Any information from a non-Messianic source was considered secular Christianity, with the sole exception of some blisteringly fundamentalist sources. Divide information into insider versus outsider ideals, giving the title secular Christians to anyone who wasn't Messianic. Generate and use propaganda extensively. This wasn't really a part of our church. It was pretty isolationist. We didn't really meet with other Messianic churches. Some years I thought we were the only church in the world that was like this. Use information gained in confession sessions. I have seen elders decide to come up and celebrate the willingness for one member or another to change, and then fully out their alcohol addiction or whatever in front of everybody. I have no idea whether they ask them if it's okay or not. Gaslight to make you doubt your own memory. The youth pastors did this constantly. Require you to report thoughts, feelings and activities. The church didn't do this, but my mother did constantly. Encourage you to spy and report on others' misconduct. The youth pastors' children were the spies and snitches, and they were very unpopular because of it. I gradually became accepted by the more secularized children, meaning that they went to high school, because all of the things they told me never got reported to anybody. #I'm no snitch. Instill black versus white, us versus them, and good versus evil thinking. Yes, it was us versus Muslims, us versus secular Christians, us versus Democrats, us versus couples who dated instead of courting. It was an intensely black and white environment. Change your identity, possibly your name. Some people elected to change their names on their own. I was told that my name was in Hebrew, a course I had to take for 3 years, but I didn't care for it, so I didn't take it. Use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. They definitely had buzzwords, like Muslims or secular, that made me feel more anxious, because these people were shown as threats. But I don't know that they advanced enough to willingly impede critical thinking. They just didn't want to ever be challenged. Induce hypnotic or trance states. Some fringy people would do this late at night sometimes, as part of the spiritual warfare thing that my mum was into. I don't know how these fringy people found each other, and I intensely avoided those groups on sight. I could tell what it was immediately, because invariably somebody was lying on the ground sobbing or dry heaving. I guess it was less of a trance than a panic attack or something. I didn't stick around to find out. Allow only positive thoughts. Anyone who was miserable, the socially expected thing was for them to openly weep during the more solemn part of the worship service while others were still dancing. Sometimes people would hug them. Sometimes people would pray for them. Sometimes the person would just cry to themselves and then wrap it up when it was time for a sermon. But there wasn't really a space for anyone to actually talk about why they were miserable. It was more of a cry to God for deliverance kind of thing. I thought something was wrong with me because I was never able to cry at all, much less aloud. Used excessive meditation, singing, prayer and chanting to block thoughts. Even if I had tried, my mind is so loud and racing that it wouldn't have worked. I tried on my own to still my mind, and it simply would not. Reject rationalising analysis and critical thinking. I think this did happen in the church. Although probably not intentionally, rational arguments were met with an accusation that the opposite party was trying to brainwash them. Instill irrational fears of leaving the group. People who left were incessantly gossiped about. I felt it myself a few years after I left for good. People kept adding me, or trying to, across social media. I made everything private, and people will still try and add me to this day.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
But there was a time where it was continuous and nauseating. Label some emotions as evil or sinful. My parents labelled anger as a sin, and this was contradicted wildly. My parents were allowed to be angry at us, but we weren't allowed to be angry at them. We were allowed to be angry at people that they were angry at, but not their friends. Ill-defined righteous anger was acceptable in the church, but someone who raised a fuss about it was labelled as divisive. Promote feelings of guilt or shame. The youth pastors instilled intense feelings of guilt and shame concerning any expression of sexuality. There was a time in life where holding a boy's hand would make my chest tighten, and not from butterflies in my stomach. Young women were seen as pure and innocent and never to be defiled with sexuality until it was time to have children, and young men were seen as corrupters, mere seconds away from defiling anybody at any time. Shower you with praise. When the folk dance group did well, we were praised. When we did poorly, we were yelled at. We were all teenagers, but we were told we ushered the presence of God into the service, and so it was really important that we were positive, open to the Holy Spirit, graceful and ready to encourage others, teach that there is no happiness without the group. We were taught that the Messianic denomination was the fullest expression of living God's word, and that other denominations were dead. All of these points that I discussed with Eustace were from Stephen Hassan's BITE model. More information on this particular model can be found in the book Combating Cult Mind Control, written by Stephen Hassan. Before Eustace wrapped up her document to me, she added a few side bits titled Other Experiences I Would Like to Note. Annual Holocaust Memorial in March, where some members were voluntold to portray Nazis and other members played Jews, and a graphic and dramatic play was done every year with the Nazis beating, forcibly separating, caging and shooting the Jews. Nobody was harmed physically, but the members who played Nazis often openly wept. The entire church was decorated in black with massive pictures of emaciated, crucified and tortured bodies in mass graves or labs. The sermon was instead a warning against the product of anti-Semitism and stories of children and adults who were thrown in ovens or died of diseases in camps. It was customary also to watch a Holocaust movie in your own time at home. I had graphic and violent nightmares every spring and never really knew why until my therapist pointed out that March is also in spring. The pastor gave off such a fearful presence that children would often just say, "Pastor David," when he entered the room, and every child would immediately stop what they were doing. Somehow, it was always heard, and those who didn't hear it just froze up with the other children and teens reflexively. He would brag about this in sermons as the mark of true respect. Sometimes we took to pranking each other by announcing it when he wasn't there, and it never changed. Everyone was always afraid to ignore at one time, and then he would be there. For whatever reason, no one was to be caught playing or talking or anything when he was in the room. I don't remember what would happen if you didn't listen. But he did shout at me once because I was asking my mother something and he thought I was arguing with her. I cried for several hours. We kept holding baptisms at a lake in central Florida, which was famous for killing 2 teenagers with a brain-eating amoeba that gets in through mouth, nose and ears. Youth pastors were vindictive and spiteful, often gleefully watching a parent reduce a child to tears after being reported for bad behaviour. They ran a summer camp for a few years, involving frequent bullying by them, and then moved the summer camp to merge with one in High Springs that had only desegregated in 2007, with half the congregation being Latin and holding quite a few black families, including mine. This was stupid at best. The congregation tried to start a school using homeschool curriculum and berated homeschool families for not turning their children into the school. The school failed miserably, with teachers starting and quitting all the time. So eventually, older children had to teach younger children subjects they didn't understand well enough to teach. There was food sometimes, and no food other times. The school had no funding, and tuition somehow didn't cover every lunch. Sometimes they had co-op days where homeschoolers could join, and field trips, but it was really at a whim of the pastor whether homeschooling students outside their school were permitted to join. It went from about 30 students at one point to everyone slowly returning to regular secular school and homeschool. My family never joined, although my mother often coordinated the field trips. At the end of it, only one student actually graduated from the school, and he did not pursue higher education. I was the only member my age to leave for college. None of the older teenagers or younger children went on to attend a 4-year university. I know of one girl who visited him frequently and was younger than me, who went on to join the FBI. Some of the girls were told they would never be allowed to do this, and instead had to attend something near the home so that they could live with their families until they got married. I was frequently discouraged from socialising with children with disabilities. This included a blind girl I met once or twice and a boy with a learning disability that no one really talked to and often berated, though he came to the church every week. This was Eustace's story, and I want to take a short minute to just say a big thank you for sitting down and deciding to open up. I know it can't be easy for people to relive these stories, and I do appreciate you giving me the time to go through everything and explain to us why your denomination may be considered a cult. There was one last thing I wanted to cover before we wrap this episode up. How can you tell if a Messianic Jew is posing as a traditional Jew? Saving Souls on YouTube have a video on signs of a Messianic cult, also called false Judaism. In this video, it is explained that you can identify someone posing as traditionally Jewish when they are actually Messianic Jewish, attempting to infiltrate and convert church members. 1. Overload of Jewish symbols and propaganda in the home and church, e.g. an entire wall covered. 2. Trying to use Christian terms and turn them into Jewish or Hebrew terms, such as leaders calling themselves Moreh, which means teacher in traditional Judaism but is only used with people kindergarten age. Wearing a talit, only traditionally worn to pray, not to teach or go shopping or out at night time. 4. House full of Jewish flags and symbols, but never Siddiqui, as they do not believe in Jewish leaders, and this could be a silent protest. 5. Televised services, particularly speeches and sermons. This is not done by most traditionally Jewish people. This is an attempt to bring Christianity into Judaism. So after all this information, do you believe Messianic Judaism is a cult? It seems as though many traditional Christians or traditional Jewish people may say this movement is a cult, but not in the way that we are exploring it, more in the sense that it is a religion that follows false beliefs and doctrine, and it is a menace to mainstream religion itself. But what about Eustace's story? Maybe some small parts or some churches within Messianism are using cult-like behaviour control. We know at least one church is, so what are your thoughts? Cult or no cult? I'll let you decide. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Cult Vault. I am your speaker, Casey. Join us next time when I look into the tragic deaths of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, 2 children whose faces haunt a nation. If you are in a cult or know someone who is, please follow the link in the description for advice on help and support. If you have a story you think I should cover, get in touch at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or cultvaultpod on Twitter and Instagram. I will also be releasing a 2-part exclusive on my Patreon next month to mark the 2-year anniversary of the execution of Shoko Asahara, infamous cult founder and leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult. I also look forward to releasing an episode dedicated to Pride Month next week, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that one too. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you in the next episode of The Cultful.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.